Well, it's 6 p.m. Call the meeting to order. First of all, I wanted to note that Ed is absent and excused. And we that in the minutes, and otherwise begin with the land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we gather on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically Nooksack and Lummi tribes, who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. On behalf of everyone here, we want to express our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Nooksack and Lummi tribes, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And next up is approval of agenda. Any changes from this approved agenda?
No.
In that case, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Motion to approve agenda as written. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Nick, go to the order.
Yeah, so as I shared last time, we were gonna hold the second of the community connections session last Thursday at the secondary campus. Unfortunately, no one showed up, but the reason I say fortunately, because the campus was very busy that night. So it was pretty fun to still be a part of a lot of things. There was secondary conferences, so parents were in and out and guardians and families were in and out. There was a varsity girls soccer game out here in the stadium, and then varsity girls volleyball in the field house. And so there was a lot of activity, and it was nice to, connect with community members in different ways. But yeah, so like I said, still a great night overall. In that same vein, elementary conferences are this week, and those have been going well. Tonight's the evening conferences at elementary schools. So there's some teachers and staff staying late to connect with families, which is always a good time of the year. A couple positive notes about some grant income we've received. Special kudos to Mrs. Rossman for her hard work on this. About $111,000 from OSPI to support a variety of outdoor learning opportunities for kindergarten through fifth students, and then $55,000 from Outdoor Schools Washington to support sixth grade attending mountain school. So yeah, those are some great opportunities for our kiddos, and having gone to mountain school a few times myself, it's a great thing.
So is that all schools?
Yep. Yeah.
And overnight?
Mountain schools overnight. Yep.
Great.
Yeah. So that's the good of the order.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Consent agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve consent agenda. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Information from the audience. Tammy? We have Natalie Chavez. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Natalie Chavez. Thank you for listening to public comments this evening. As you know, I've been speaking about school-based health clinics, and there's been different school-based health clinics around the country. They've been getting financial incentives, millions of dollars to expand this throughout the country, which I believe are for nefarious reasons. Big Pharma is behind it. Merck is one of the funders of the School-Based Health Alliance, and Merck is the maker of the Gardasil HPV vaccine, which is pushed at these school-based health clinics, along with puberty hormone blockers, as well as antidepressants and other stuff without parental consent. So I have obvious concerns about that. I've spoke to you about this case, and I'm going to try to get through it because I know I only have 3 minutes. It's the case in Maine where the father came across a Ziploc baggie with Zoloft in it. It was unlabeled. It came from a school-based health clinic. It was actually at the Bulldog Health Clinic in Maine, and he had obvious concerns. He asked his daughter what it was, and she told him it was Zoloft and that she had received it at the school-based health clinic. And as you know, Zoloft had the black box warning, especially for people under the age of 24. After that, he kept his daughter home for a week. And after discovering the baggie with Zoloft, in order to make an appointment with a doctor of his choosing and a therapist of his choosing. And that resulted in someone at the school or the school-based health clinic contacting CPS, Child Protective Services, which then led to an investigation of the family. Her father was told by the Bulldog Health Center, that's the school-based health clinic, that they could legally prescribe the medication to his daughter without informing him. And they did not comment on the lack of label or safety container. He said, quote, "I'm looking out for the best interests of my daughter. That's why I pulled her out of school." He said, "Because I don't think she really ought to be there if they're going to start giving her pills, you know, till I sit down with the doctor that I pick for my daughter, not through the school," unquote. And then on Thursday, quote, he said, "a representative from Child Protective Services called him and informed him that they would be arriving shortly to make a surprise visit to his home to conduct a child welfare investigation." They called and told him that it was an emergency situation at his house. And he said that the CPS representative only had information that the school or Bulldog Health Center, the school-based health clinic, had. So he knew it was one of them that reported him. The members of his family were questioned individually and as a group by the CPS representative Dylan Wood, who eventually indicated the complaint against the father was unfounded. Thank God, but he still was seeking legal counsel, rightly so. The father said he and his wife may have signed a consent form at the start of the school year, but he still thought the incident violated his rights. An attorney, Justine Tangway, with nearly 20 years of experience advocating for children in various areas of the law, that these consent forms are a key issue for parents to be aware of. At the start of each school year, parents are given many forms to sign, and they likely don't realize they are signing away their rights over their children's health care. Most parents tend to assume that school medical consent forms allow a school nurse to administer first aid treatment for minor illnesses or emergency treatment. But that is not what this is, she said. It's something much more nefarious. Unlike school nurses, SBHCs function as primary care clinics. By signing consent forms, parents may unknowingly give those who run the SBHC the legal authorization to provide comprehensive health care, which may include, but not limited to, the ability to provide preventative treatment, behavioral and mental health services, reproductive counseling, lab and prescription services, various medical screenings, vaccinations, and disease management. One form they may receive at the start of the school year is a blanket consent form. And if they sign it, they're basically abdicating their parental rights to make medical decisions for their children. The school won't need to reach out and ask, "Hey, can we test your child for whatever thing?" No, they've signed the form. They've already said, "Do whatever you want." But she said, parents who sign such a form have the right to revoke it. She suggested that parents whose children go to schools with SBHCs should find out what the forms they are signing say and decide what they want to opt out of. She also said that the clinic, these clinics are separate entities, not administered by the school, yet it's very confusing for parents because the school is the one responsible for obtaining the signed consent forms from parents. That means parents are not giving informed consent. And I'll continue at the next meeting. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. So next is our study session, and we are covering strategic plan goal number 2, which is broadly finance, facilities, and operations. And I think, Brian, you're up for this one. Start out with.
Yeah, so as Brian comes up, I'll just share a little bit that as Russ mentioned, this is goal 2, which is finance, facilities, and operations. And you've scheduled other times for us to look at goal 2 throughout this upcoming year. Today's focus will be strictly on finance. So we won't talk about facilities or operations today simply because of the timing of it. it pairs well with it being the year end of the fiscal year. So we'll touch on the facilities operations part at a later meeting.
And I also want to note Brian has finished the finance report in a timely manner, which is always good. So,
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's due tomorrow and it has been received by the ESD, path review, and sent up to OSPI already. So
yeah, well, congratulations.
thank you. Yes, glad to have that off my plate.
Yeah.
Yeah, on to the next thing now. All right, so we are talking about 23-24 here. Nothing about 24-25 yet. And just some basics for, the public that may be listening or watching later. And as we remind ourselves of what we're talking about, there are 5 independent funds that we have out of necessity learned those lines in legal ways this year. The ASB fund is for student activities, clubs, it's cars, cultural, athletic, recreational, and social activities. Money is controlled by the students. Transportation vehicle funds is only used for the purchase of yellow school buses. The capital project funds is used for construction and renovation of facilities, major things, not maintenance. Debt service fund is essentially a clearinghouse for our debts and obligations. And the general fund is the one that we will spend the most time on today. It's the most important fund for the district. It's the general operating budget of the district. And the general fund can pay for any of the other things that are up there, but any of the other things that are up there cannot pay for general fund activities. So here's just a few more definitions I wanted to be part of the record, talking about basic education, categorical education, things like special education, LAP, bilingual education, pupil transportation, food service. Those are sequestered, and you can't move those funds to other places or categories. Certificated and classified staff and the difference therein mainly being the certificate, though every employee is important to the school district. Go to the next. MSOCs, which we've talked a lot about, those are material supplies and operating costs. The EP&O levy, that's the official definition there that says that we are using it for day-to-day operations instead of enrichment because the state is not fully funding education. FTE, and think about how that works for different categories of staff members versus head count, which is each individual person or child or employee. And OSPI is something we will reference throughout our time together. So here are our cash balances as of August 31st. This is money we actually have in the bank. Different than a fund balance. A fund balance includes things like inventory. The fund balance does not reflect transfers or loans that are going between funds. So the fund balance will be different. And we'll talk more about fund balance later, but these are our actual cash balances. I wish Ed was here. I could tell him we finally did get our bus delivered this month, so we'll pay for it. And you'll see that vehicle transportation amount go down next month when I report on the month of October. This has not changed. The budget was 1536. Our annual average FTE at the end was 1505. And if you go to the next slide, this is a comparison, not, if it were 1505, if it was 1536 where it was budgeted, but this is just looking at 22-23 ending annual average FTE, 23-24, and the difference that drop in enrollment made to the district finances. It's approximate, that amount of 13,500 is a little bit old, but it hasn't changed all that much. And with inflation, it's, it's the number that people still use.
That's including both the local levy and OSP.
That's just the state funding.
That's the state funding.
Yes, because the local levy is funded off of the last actual enrollment we have. So it's 2 years in arrears. So we'll see the local levy amount that we can collect decreasing over time, but it's 2 years back because that's the last real enrollment we have. When we certify a levy for the budget for the 24-25 school year, we didn't have ending average FTE for the 23-24 year yet. So we went to 22-23. which is the last actual data point we've had. So this is just the difference in state funding from 22-23 to 23-24 based on the drop in enrollment. So here's the final versions of these. We'll start with the new ones next month. Which you'll see we had a projected revenue and we went over that. We collected more than the projected revenue, which is exactly what we were hoping to do. A little breakdown of what that revenue looks like, where it comes from. You see the majority is from the state. There is some federal and levy in there, and then the other local revenue that is that's the sale of goods from our CTE programs and our, the flower shop, sale, the metal shop, local grants. We get grants from the ESD that fall into that category, grants from the county health department that fall into that category. The Foundry 10 grant that the high school received from a tech company in Bellevue fell into that category. And the next slide shows the percentage breakdown of those to make it a little more clear, though the yellow is less clear. I think that says 14.
11.
That's 11.
Yep.
Yes, I am wearing my glasses, but sorry about that. So going on to the expenditure tracking, we were hoping to see that bar not fill up fully, and that's exactly what it did. So our expenditures were less than budgeted. The next is a breakdown of those as well, looking at where we spent our money. You'll see the majority is salary and benefits, and then we have an amount in MSOCs, which is essentially everything else. And we will talk more about that MSOC funding and the money we get and where the money goes later. Any questions so far as we're going through this? The next is percentages. We can go to that one. Yeah.
Questions?
No.
Okay. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. But you'll see that here we've got 86% of our well, we're in the business of people, right? We're teaching people, and it takes people to teach people. So the majority of our budget is people, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah. And you'll see as other districts are sharing their numbers or percentages, this will vary by 1 percentage point, one way or another, or 2 perhaps, but by and large, every district's in the same spot we are as far as the amount of money put into people. And as Brian mentioned, and we've heard from other folks too, that in this business, it's okay to spend this amount of money on people.
So here's our comparison set with the 22-23 school year. The revenue was less, but if you think about how we got more revenue than we expected, and even just the per pupil amount was more than that difference, right? So we did well with our revenue, and considering we lost 3% of utilization as well. So revenue still less than the 22-23 year, but better than we were initially hoping for. There's the expenditures down $1.3 million, which is good. That's again what we wanted to see was some decrease in expenditures over time so that we could start to balance and correct our operational budget. For the final month in August, revenues and expenditures were near even. And you'll see down at the bottom, 667,000 is our revenues the difference in revenues and expenditures. We overspent our revenues by that amount. And we'll talk again more about that later and talk about some specifics of why and how that happened. The next is the bar graph that shows that our expenditures are actually fairly predictable. Our revenue stream is not. Well, let me back that up and say that it's predictable, it's not consistent. So we're going to predict on this pattern again. So the beginning fund balance started at $1.6 million. Change in fund balance of negative $667,074 brings us to an ending fund balance of $941,288, which is significantly better than the negative $1.7 million that we predicted. The sheet that I will pass around here is a breakdown of that. There's 2 for you guys. And this is attached to board docs. If there's the right one, statement. All right, I got two and they look very similar. Budgetary, here, take this one instead. Sorry. We'll talk about that one next. All right. Which is the best one? So this is directly from the F-196. Now that we have it, might as well use it. We are looking for the public listening at the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, governmental funds. And essentially, if you're looking at that left column, the general fund, it shows the revenues by category, similar to how we had it up there. Total revenues, expenditures, again, by category, regular instruction, special education, vocational education, support services, which is our food service and bus services mostly. You flip it over, you see the total expenditures and a number that says revenues over or under expenditures, and that's a negative $1.12 million. That does not include the transfer, which is the number below that. And then the total over under 667,074 and the beginning and ending fund balance. So this is more detail on that, more detail than you probably need. But it's a pretty clear example of here's your beginning, here's your over under, and here's your end. All other funds are included there. They're just less consequential because none of them were in trouble.
So the beginning fund balance does represent that 1.6 million.
So the beginning fund balance there, 1.608, 363, yes, does represent. So that's the beginning fund balance in 22-23. Sorry, the ending fund balance in 22-23. That's the beginning fund balance for the year.
Right.
Yep.
And the transfer, if I remember right, had been made prior to that.
The transfer happened in the 23-24 school year. So just above that number, you'll see it says total other financing sources. And if you go above that, it says transfers in 4,053 and 64. 453,064.
That's from capital.
That's the transfer from capital. And yes, that's it. So that's included in that number negative 667,074. Without that transfer, the number is negative 1.120. Negative $1.1 million. It's counted as other because it's a transfer, it's not actual expenditures or revenue. It's that other financing source. But the bottom line, ending fund balance, $941,288.45.
And what was it budgeted to be?
Negative 1.1. Oh, sorry. When we budgeted for this year.
What did we anticipate it being when we adopted last year's budget?
Okay, when we adopted last year's budget, we anticipated it being negative $1.17 million.
It's roughly a $2 million difference.
Yeah, about $2.1 million.
In the correct direction.
That's on our next sheet. I can pass it out now. That's okay. They already have it over there. You guys can have it here. And this comes up with the question, but there'll be more discussion a little bit later on. But what this does, and for the public, we're looking at the budgetary comparison schedule. So this shows the actual budget that we had us running a deficit of $2.4 million. The actual deficit was 1.1. So the positive variance there is $1.3 million. The ending fund balance was budgeted to be 1.175381. The actual is positive 941,288. The difference, the variance there is the positive $2.1 million. So Russ, to your question that you've asked several times is, how much difference do the things that we've been able to do make? What was the difference in that when we didn't hire an assistant principal, when we did the transfer from capital, when we made the adjustments that we made mid-year, those corrections we could make? This sheet shows those differences. Sorry, I was looking at the back page, the back of that, where it shows the bottom line. But this again is a breakdown in the same way. Revenues, you can see the revenues in all categories are up except for other. And that's because we budgeted $1 million of capacity. We never actually planned to claim $1.1 million in other revenue. So that's where our capacity was.
So to look at the savings that we made by cutting costs would be the 743,000
Correct.
figure.
Yep, in the expenditures category, you can see broken down by all the different categories, the difference in spending. The expenditures were a total of $743,643.46 positive variance. So we did that much better than we expected on the revenue. And the total difference over $2.1 million variance. So
What are the major factors that accounted for the 573,000 excess above budget on revenues, total revenues?
Well, a large portion of that was grant funding that we received. If you remember, Director Lenterman, for example, found the
Right.
community impact grant that brought us in a windfall from safety net that we didn't expect. The transportation safety net wasn't included in here. Actual safety net came in higher than we expected. Yeah, those are some of those things. Once again, the transfer is the transfer included there? Not included there. That's in other financing sources on the back page. That's another one-time thing that we were able to include. So that's included in the bottom line, but not in the revenues up top. I do also think that going into the budget, you know, you look at, there are some nice round numbers there that perhaps when putting the budget together, Steve went on the low end, as we should, of those revenues, thinking, you know, this is how much we could get of that range. I'm going to aim for the lower end of that so that we're not in a situation where we're under collecting the revenue that we expect.
Yeah, I think to your question, Russ, about that difference of revenue of that number, a little bit over $500,000. I think when the district is in a healthier spot, like as we talked about during the budgeting process, ideally those types of things, the safety net pieces, aren't built into a budget at all, because that's going to be how you develop a conservative, healthy budget, is by not anticipating those grants or those safety nets. But we found ourselves in previous years where that was in the budget because that's what the budget needed to be in order to be balanced. However, that income, that revenue is not always guaranteed. So it's nice to have that built in as you know, a conservative piece.
To that point, I can tell you what that number is not. That's timber revenue, which was budgeted at $250,000. It came in at just over 88. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. So there's a little more analysis here as we go on. There's the actual versus estimated fund balance. And that's the real original estimate does not include the transfer from capital that we didn't know we were going to do at that time. Does not include the apportionment advance. So the actual fund balance you would see go up in October. Oh, you do see it go up in October there, and that's for those two reasons. So I wanted to include that so we could see where we came from, what we expected, and where we ended up. What actually happened there.
I think it's also important to acknowledge, you know, as we were able to course correct in a pretty healthy way to the tune of a $2 million positive variance. It's important to acknowledge the hard work of everyone in the district, not just, you know, the folks who are adopting the budget and making decisions, but this has meant changes to workloads for a lot of people here. And I think it's just important that we acknowledge them because this is a very positive thing. This is something to celebrate, I think, but also know that it took a lot of hard work to get where we are. There's still a lot of hard work to go, but you know, acknowledging our staff who are doing more things than they've ever done before, and doing it because they are feeling like they're a part of the team. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
So if we took on the ending fund balance of 2.1 million, if we remove the loan from that, then we would be at about $500,000.
Remove the loan from which part?
So So the end of the fiscal year, the total ending fund balance, the last number on the second page you gave us is 2.1 million. But that 2.1 includes 1.6 million?
That's not the ending fund balance.
That's the difference.
That's the difference in
Oh,
what
that's
we
the difference.
expected in the budget. So on the left is what we expected in the budget.
Okay,
In the middle is the actual, and on the right is the difference. So this is the chart that shows
okay.
the
So,
things we were able to do and the difference it made compared to the budget.
so the 941 it accounts for in the accounting, it accounts for that loan. It
It's-
subtracts it out.
That, yes, that loan is not included in the bottom line fund
Right.
balance. And that's why if you go back to the cash balance that we
Right.
actually have,
Yeah, It
it's
shows.
$1.8 million. And it
Right.
shows up there in that cash balance, but it does not show up here in the fund balance.
so
It's
this
considered a liability.
that
correct.
makes, because of all the accounting balances, the 941 is an authentic number.
It's an authentic fund balance. It's not our cash balance.
Right.
Yes.
Fund balance.
Yeah.
Yes, this is our
Which I think
actual fund
is
balance.
for me, a better way to think of it, because that's the real money that, the money we have minus the obligations we
Mhm.
have.
Mhm. But, and it also includes things like inventory. There is a non-spendable amount of that fund
Mhm.
balance as well.
Right,
Yes. Thank you for clarifying.
but the inventory, at least ideally, is stuff that we would have been paying for next year.
And stuff-
Unless it's stuff sitting around that we wish we'd never bought.
Well, if the auditors ask, we know what it is and we're using it all. And we know where it is, we're tracking it all. And they did ask for it from our Chromebooks and we were able to produce them. So I'm really good about that. So, sorry, further questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
questions or comments, Jason?
I'm good. I agree 100% with Nick on, it was a big team effort on this and it still is moving forward, right? These numbers sound good, but we're gonna have to obviously still really pay attention and watch what we have going on, so. But no, this is good.
Yeah, and that goes to the way that I'd like to think about it here is thinking about having a two-track problem. We had an immediate problem where we were running out of cash, right? And that was a problem. When we started last year, this time of year, we didn't have we did by now have a plan to pay for payroll in November, but we would have run out without the apportionment advance from OSBI. That was a problem. And to get that cash in, we can use special one-time things, right? We can't always count on that community impact safety net. We can't always count on our actual safety net or transportation safety net. We can't always count on having a large transfer or timber revenue. So we did everything we could to help the fund balance stay positive and help the cash balance stay positive. And that was one problem, a problem we can solve with things that are not sustainable. We had a second problem, which is that the past two budgets were underwater by about $2 million. Our operating budget was losing $2 million from the fund balance every year, and that's where we got into the situation where we were running out of cash. That problem has to be solved with future sustainable items, right? Things we can do going forward. I would consider our current staffing and hiring practices unsustainable for the long-term future. Sustainable in the short term, but unsustainable for the long term. I would consider the budget freeze we're in where I had to tell one of our building principals that he couldn't get the pens he liked because they were $14 a box, unsustainable. And not for the reason of pens, but for the reason of other supplies that we are, going to need. So when we went into bargaining with the union, they were good partners in that and they understood that we had a problem. We had to fix that operating budget. And it's going to be tight. And the next budget we need to pass, I think the next slide may speak to this. I'm getting ahead of myself. I tend to do that. Here's those unsustainable factors. Just a few of them that I put up there. One is that the fund balance increased significantly in the F-196 when we closed the books. That happened last year. There's the extra transfer, community impact safety net. The difference in the actual versus the budgeted spending, right? And those things that I don't consider sustainable. The next slide is some things that we'll need to think about with future sustainability. Our beginning fund balance for the year is that $941,000 that transfers over to the beginning fund balance. It's a 3% fund balance. In the month of September, that fell to 0.5%, because September is always like that. We don't collect our grants. There's still startup costs happening, but that's why we need a fund balance. So it's at 3%. For each percentage point, we're looking at approximately $340,000. To exit binding conditions, we need to budget to get to 4%, which is adding $340,000 in the next budget. So when we pass a budget this year for next year, we need to add $340,000 just to get out of binding conditions. To get to board policy, we need to add $680,000. And our current operating budget only adds $43,000. So this speaks to, Jason, what you were saying of, this is a really positive thing that's taken a lot of hard work without legislative action, which we don't budget on, but we will be passing this next budget after the session. We still have some work to do. So that's the second track of the future sustainability for the Mount Baker School District.
I think that's, this really speaks to the importance of that fund balance, right? Like Brian said, we had an underwater budget of about $2 million a year. For a few years, it chipped away at the fund balance. And as he mentioned, hey, it's starting off feeling pretty good about 3%. That 3% became 0.5% pretty quick. Just because if you go back to that green line, right, that it is predictable. So we just need to be prepared for that predictability because it's predictable variability, right? And again, he also mentioned we're not going to budget on hope of legislative advocacy. This also speaks to the importance of that, right? I'm very confident in where we are relative to where other districts are. For better or worse, we were a little bit ahead of the curve on these financial challenges because the legislative advocacy by our neighboring districts is going to be to get them back to zero. We're looking at zero right now. So the legislative advocacy at this point will help us grow beyond that zero. And it's going to be helpful that we have more of a unified voice in Olympia this time. And it's also the longer session. So I think these are all important things to remember when we engage with our legislators about this kind of stuff.
The next slide there speaks a little to that, talking about this is the statewide push. You see it in WASDA, you'll see it in WASA, you see it in WASBO, you see it from AWSP. And when we set up our legislative platform, we piggybacked off of those items and those platforms because then we can speak with that unified voice. So they're talking about the big three all across the state because everybody is underfunded in these three categories. Our MSOCs are underfunded by over $2.6 million. Transportation, underfunded by just over $400,000. And special education, underfunded by $951,000. Now, the smallest item up there, transportation, if that was fully funded, we would exit binding conditions. Right? And that's the smallest item.
And something else I want to put in context too, for those that either are listening at home or going to rewatch this. We're so fortunate to have the taxpayers support our schools in the way they did. Our levy passed at a higher percentage than any other rural district in Whatcom County, but it's because of this underfunding that the levy money is being used, right? When we hear Coach Lepp talk about how challenging the athletic season is to run, it's because we're spending levy dollars where the state's not funding us properly. So I just think that's important to understand that context of we have to pay our insurance bills. We have to keep the lights on. And unfortunately, the way the state has set up school funding, it has to come from our local tax dollars, that was never the original intent of those levies, which is just something I want folks to remember.
Yeah, thank you.
On that previous slide, is there a reason we're having 5% and OSPI is only at 4%? Is that common that we would adopt a higher percentage than what OSPI is saying we have to have?
OSPI has been a good partner in this.
Okay.
So our board policy says 5%. OSPI recommends 8 to 8.5% is their recommendation. But that's all determined locally. Some board policy, and some board policy says we'll present a budget that maintains a reasonable fund balance. And that way, in bargaining, you can decide what's reasonable. Ours says very specifically 5% of expenditures, and I think that's less common now. But when looking at our binding conditions, I guess in one of our first meetings, OSPI took another look at our finances and said, maybe aim for 4.
Okay.
And allowed that to be to exit binding condition. And part of that is because they want us to be successful, and part of that is because they see us do the good work. And if you read that binding conditions letter, it specifically says, we trust the work the Mount Baker School District is doing, and they're doing the right things, and we feel confident that they're going to get out of this. So they made it a little easier for us to get out.
I also think, and in our meetings with OSPI, their CFO, TJ Kelly, has really brought up, like Brian just mentioned, that concept of 8.5% for a fund balance. And that's something that Ed has discussed as well, that I think that can't be a next year goal for us, but I think it needs to be for sustainability of the district. 8.5% represents 1 month. So if we can get to that point, I think that's a good long-term growth goal for us.
The other thing that they've talked about, just on the topic of 4% fund balance and what that means, if you go back to the idea of categorical programs that we touched on at the very beginning in those definitions, if there's a program that's categorical, in fact, LAP is a good example because LAP did have a little bit of carryover. We were allocated more than we spent, and that's just we did what we needed to do for our kids and didn't end up using all that money. So that money then rolls over. It's reallocated into the next year, but it's reserved for LAP funding. So if you were to look at the fund balance sheet that you get every month that shows, the revenues, the expenditures, the backside of that has equity accounts and fund balances. And what you would see is that there's a line item, it's 10Q890, unreserved fund balance. And the number there is 92,000. Everything else is spoken for between categorical programs, non-spendable items like the professional development days that the state funds, that's a big one, and food service. So OSPI may say it's not just 4%, but it's 4% in unreserved fund balance because you can't spend that other money. Legally, we can't spend that other money on things we need the fund balance for.
Can't spend LAP funding for Puget Sound Energy.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So the unreserved fund balance is currently sitting about 92,000. I don't believe that they want us to do that. I believe they want us to get back to that eventually. I don't believe they want us to make really drastic changes to get there right away, just to exit binding conditions. And I do believe that they'll listen to us when we talk about that because they are good partners in this.
We'll meet with them next week.
We do?
No more
Yep.
soon.
Okay, we've been asking questions as we go along. The next few slides are looking at some of the other funds, but I will pause here just to see if there are any questions before we go on that haven't been asked or answered yet.
Brenda,
Danielle has a question.
Danielle, okay.
This is a little while back that you had mentioned that we had gotten a pretty large grant from Ian's work, that was a special ed grant.
There's a safety net community impact grant.
And is that ongoing for multiple years, or is that a 1 year, that was just this last year?
So if we take a step back, safety net is specific to special education, and it is for students who have very specific and high cost needs that are, there's kids that cost us a lot of money. They have a one-to-one nurse, or they have a outside placement, some of those things, there's conditions they have to meet. And Director Lintman does an excellent job of maximizing the funding we can get for that. And that we apply for every year. We don't know what we're going to get in the end. So there are special education children that may need a placement that's going to cost the district $150,000. And we do that because the child needs that and has a civil right to have that. And then Director Lintman goes and does those grant applications to get that money back. And that's the safety net funding. Now, there's a secondary safety net funding grant that I didn't know about until he brought it up, which is community impact, which is comparing the rates of homelessness to our rates of special education and those high needs, and demonstrating that in the community, the impact of homelessness in our community drives up special education costs, and therefore that's another safety net expenditure. Yes. So that again is an application. We have to look at the data. We have to compare the data and see if the data shows that there's actual need there, or that there is a deficit due to the community impact on special education. And if so, then we apply for that, and then they have a committee that looks at it. And you can live stream in and watch their meeting if you want to, but then they talk about every application and see whether they want to fund it in full, in part, give more because of the data they're looking at. And then they tell us sometime in March whether we're going to have that money or not.
Also with regards to the special education safety net that, Ian has applied for and, got for us. And also take a close look at the plans that are developed, what are called individualized education plans. Because from a financial standpoint on the state's end, that's a safety valve where they ensure that the expense is authentic as opposed to a district seeking funds just to seek funds. Which I think really acknowledges the work that Ian does with our psychologists and our special education teachers in developing those plans that do pass muster, that do present evidence that shows these are verifiable costs that our students do need these supports. And it's a cost we couldn't carry on just ourselves, so.
From a revenue versus expenditure standpoint, the safety net revenue is very important, but for determining what is a sustainable budget, it's revenue that pays for expenditures we've had that wouldn't have necessarily been part of our budget. They may show up mid-year. I mean, Ian knows better what the predictability of those expenditures are, but we, to the extent they're predictable, we can include them in our budget. But generally, I would expect that a child comes in or generates a high cost, we have to pay for it. We hope to get paid back. But to develop a sustainable budget, we have to have our regular ongoing expenses and expenditures balanced and not be depending on the luck of the draw, so to speak, on those various things that may or may not happen.
It's best practice to count safety net and the community impact safety net in that unsustainable category because they're unpredictable.
Right.
That's what I was, thank you.
Yeah.
That's
So-
Yeah.
Yes, it's best practice to not budget for safety net.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
and we hope to get back to best practice soon.
$2 million problem.
Mhm. Yep.
Well,
And
that's
I
why
would
that's
like-
why we were budgeting so low on timber revenue at 250,000.
Then we got
And then
88.
we got eaten on that.
Yep.
But
I would like to know before we move up our safety net as well, that is those children that we receive safety net funding for still does not fully fund the cost of those children. There's a minimum threshold and we still have a lot of cost over what we're funded for to meet the needs of those children.
So another comment you made was the current staffing level is unsustainable. Could you elaborate on that?
I think everybody's feeling the squeeze. And I think that our educational program will be better when we have a few more people to deliver it. I think, we're going to be okay. But I do think we would see staff looking for greener pastures if they could find them in these times, if we continue with the current staffing levels. We have people out there doing really great work and really hard work, and we appreciate that. But I also know what that feels like. I mean, it's hard here because of staffing levels, but as a teacher, I understand that and I've been there before. And I just worry about, levels of stress placed on people. Class size is a thing that factors into student success. And we're lucky to have such great teachers that can manage well. But I would hope in the future that when we're thinking about rebuilding, again, being in the people business, that we look at people when we start that rebuilding process.
There's two aspects of that. One is how fast do we expand our fund balance as we go past 4% and then get to the 5% that's in board policy, and ideally to at least a month's worth of expenditures, how fast we do that. But also, I don't see being able to achieve that sustainable level if we are continuing to have to pay so much of our operating costs out of the levy, of our basic ed costs out of the levy. So if you look at the the underfunding list there, and you got $4 million there that we were hammering away at. That is I think the key to being able to afford that staffing level you're talking about. And of those things, I think MSOC, certainly legislators are talking about doing something, but doing something to them is different than doing something for us.
Right.
And special ed, I've talked with our legislators and with Superintendent Ragdoll about how increasing the special ed cap costs less money as that cap goes higher. Because more districts drop out of an added expenditure. They're already, they're either this, a 16% level might satisfy their whole special ed population. But as it gets up closer to what our current population is, those additional percentage increases do not cost the state as much money. And therefore that's one I've been trying to get legislators to realize that they can help districts that are strapped on special ed costs at less cost to the state. Because we're every district's going to take the less than 14% say at a 14% cap. Some are going to take the 16% cap, going to draw on that money. But as we get up to our level, we have very few peers. At our level, it's about 22% special ed identification. So that's an area that I have at least a tiny bit of.
I think going back to your earlier question too about the staffing piece, and as Brian mentioned, qualifying it as unsustainable, I would agree with that assessment in that, one of this, as we look to, have that hard challenge of building back, which is a good spot to be in, as finances allow. I think one of the things that we looked at as we made, the reductions this year, we tried as hard as we could to keep it away from the classroom and directly with the kids. And I feel like we're getting to a spot where those folks that are furthest removed from the kids, we're at a pretty efficient level of staffing right now, I'd say. So we're in a spot that when we're able to build back, it's going to be those that are closest to the kids, right? There's going to be, I know there are workloads that are stressful that for those in the district office or in the support departments, but I'm feeling more confident about where those staffing levels are, and my concerns about sustainability are those that are in the classroom. As we look to hopefully get to a spot where we can reallocate some resources when those resources are available. But Russ, to answer your other question about that concept of, as the board decides what fund balance we look for, is it that 5%, is it getting back to that 8%, or getting up to 8.5%, and how quickly we get there. One of the tools that I want to remind the board of that you have at your discretion that I thought worked incredibly well this year, knock on wood so far, it's still just a month into this year, is that concept of enrollment forecasting, right? That's one of the highest leverage ways you can create a conservative budget that will help our fund balance. We'll talk a little bit about enrollment in just this monthly update, but to remind you and remind folks listening that we established a budget based on revenue of 1448 FTE, which is the first time since I've been at Mount Baker where we've been that conservative with revenues. And hopefully we're going to be higher than that for our average annual FTE. And that's going to be getting us closer to a sustainable system, to a sustainable financial system. But like I said, our staff are carrying the load right now, right? Our staff are carrying the difference, as we think about what our budgeted FTE is and what our actual FTE is. That's great for resources, but it means that there's people that are carrying some pretty heavy loads.
Did you have a further question?
My favorite question about enrollment prediction. Yeah.
Are you asking me to predict next year already?
No.
Because I'm not ready to start on 25, 26 yet.
No, but you know, I'd love to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will get into an enrollment level of detail with the October report, the September finance report that Nick will deliver soon.
I do have a follow-up question. You said some of our staff are carrying a pretty heavy load. Can you give just a couple of examples of what that looks like
Mhm.
and how that's a shift for folks? Do you know what I mean? Like maybe
Yeah.
paint a little bit more concrete picture for us?
Yeah, I was talking to a high school science teacher who has a section of freshman biology with 39 students in it. That's larger than class sizes have been since, I mean, that's larger than the biology class I attended as a student. It's larger than class sizes we've seen here. And you know what, to the credit of the staff member, she wasn't sharing this information to complain. It's just a piece of information. And that's what, again, I can't reiterate how great the staff have been. They are doing the work, right? They're not complaining. They're saying, we're doing this as a team. We're gonna, carry the load together in the hope of being financially sustainable. So I won't have 39 kids in my freshman biology every year.
And that's a lab class when students are doing hands-on.
Yeah.
Where you're supervising experiments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So that's one example.
That's a lot of, and what would be a more comfortable number, do you think?
I mean, I'll defer to Bridget on that one. What have we seen in biology classes?
Yeah, like, 25 would be
A safe,
a safe and, kind of pushing that,
yeah,
at that envelope too.
but
Yeah.
39, that is, you're starting to think about capacity of the space
Mhm.
and the equipment that they're using and being
Yeah.
able to supervise them doing things safely. Yeah.
We're always gonna, in a relatively small district, you're always gonna have these discrepancies. It's just how often they crop up and what capacity you have to manage them.
Mm.
It's the prototypical school model was based on for secondary, 600 students at the high school.
624, I think.
Yeah.
So when we're less than that, you still have to provide those core classes,
Yeah.
but it's going to change, and we've had to adjust some of our class offerings to account for filling a whole class instead of having two small classes.
Mhm.
But we won't be out of the woods on that one for a while, but I think we're headed the right direction, and I think this is really good news. I think
Yeah.
we've made, I really didn't think we would, and I didn't intend to make as much progress because I thought it would take longer to get back, and I think by being able to make this much progress, we're gonna save ourselves a year of hardship, I think. So that ideally, when the state does start to fund us at a better level, we'll be better situated to put this past behind us.
Mhm.
Well, I think seeing better numbers brings Nick's of seeing the teachers not necessarily complaining, right? Because they're seeing a positive out of it, a good positive, big positive, where if they weren't, I mean, that, if we would have left, let's say, enrollment a little higher than what we did, right? And been more there, the numbers would be smaller. They'd be probably not as nice or happy about it, so that helps a lot.
Yeah, I really feel like our staff has been good partners in solving a problem that the district has, right? Not approaching it as us versus them, and I greatly appreciate that. And that's with all staff members saying like, okay, I'm going to do my part, and that means this year things are going to be different, and maybe next year, but it's my part of solving a problem that the district has, the district of which I am a part.
I will say, having been in an educational setting during 2008 recession, where I was working, we lost 40% of our state funding. The first year of belt tightening is hard and painful, but 3 years out, you get the burnout. Right? And so I think we want to be mindful of that, we've got willing partners right now But like you pointed out, people will start looking for greener pastures because they won't be able to sustain that burnout.
Mhm.
That it will come. And so I've watched that happen in my career. And it's real and we should anticipate it however we can. But I also am mindful, we have yet to see the bottom of that enrollment decline.
Mhm.
And we don't know where the bottom is. And so as long as we're going downward in losing students, we're going to have to continue to contract our budget based off of that enrollment prediction. So I hate to be doom and gloom when we've got such good work that we've done. But we've still got work ahead of us.
I think the analogy you used at a previous meeting was, we gotta wring out the towel once. And then we're just gonna squeeze it a little bit. So we're wringing it out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And after that, it won't be so painful. You're right, because we're doing the hard work now.
But, your point, Danielle, points to the need each year to keep very close to the ground, and this is particularly at secondary level where we have a lot more options at how to allocate classes, where students are going to be. To keep a really close eye on that from a budgetary standpoint, so we maximize the student's opportunity, but don't end up with a declining enrollment classes that are too costly. So it's a delicate balance.
All right, well, with no further questions, we'll go to the next 4 funds. These are quick, they each get 1 slide. There are no issues in these. You see there, capital projects gained some funding. And sorry, go back to that capital project one more time. If you were to go way back and look at the cash balance, you see a cash balance of about $362,000 currently. So again, that shows the really stark difference between fund balance and cash balance, and that's because the fund balance does not include that loan that we expect to be repaid. So I included that as a transfer. It will go back in, and that's where some of that money, the fund balance, comes from. The debt service fund, that was money that we identified as timber revenue that was eligible for transfer to the capital projects fund, and we transferred it over. The debt service fund best practice is that there's not a lot of money in there because it is just a clearinghouse. So the remaining balance in there is a little bit more than what we will need to pay the interest on the last loan payment. So once in December, we pay that last loan, that balance will drop to just under $2,000, and then we could actually close the debt service fund and move that money to capital, and keep it only for the purpose of collecting timber revenue that comes in until we take out another loan. ASB did better than they expected, more revenue than expenditures, and moderate gain.
So you're not proposing to close the debt service fund?
So we could.
We could, but you're not proposing. Because we need to keep it open as a place to receive.
You can close the fund, but still receive the timber funds that come to it. So you close activity, and it's $200 in banking fees a year, so I'm not really all that worried about it. But I guess the point is that after we make our next loan payment, we will have no use for that fund except the collection of timber revenue, because we don't have any more loans to pay unless we take out another loan or go for a bond.
Yeah, I suspect we'll want to over time. So I kind of
Yes.
because currently I don't think the loan, the interest rates are such that it's worthwhile, but they'll get back there.
I think that'll be a topic for maybe our next operational meeting, because I did identify a source of a loan that I think we could get under 4%, but I'm still working on that.
Yeah.
And that's still under 4%, but over 3.5%. So.
And if we get the large grant you're talking about, we may, I don't know if it's funded so you pay back after you've expended?
We'll get there when we
You
get it.
get reimbursed after the fact,
Yeah.
so we do need a funding source for that.
Mhm.
Which could potentially be a loan, is that correct?
Let's work on that in the next
Okay.
operational meeting.
Okay.
Yep, yeah. Transportation vehicle ended with 550,000 because we did not buy that bus, but we're buying it now. And I believe that's it.
Other questions?
No.
Okay. Okay,
Thank you,
Well,
Brian.
thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. I think it, it shows the work done both by our district office, the district administration, and people throughout the district. All pulling together in challenging circumstances, and I think we're it's a credit to everyone.
I agree.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, let's see where we left off here. The next up is action items, board resolution 24-25-1, transfer of funds from capital projects to the general fund. Nick, do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, Brian had just talked about how we've done transfers in the from the capital projects fund to the general fund. Historically, we're gonna do it again. These are all things that are legally allowable expenses under capital expenditures, such as tech subscriptions, support of the tech infrastructure. As we become increasingly more engaged with tech, the more that there's gonna qualify eligible to move from capital projects to the general fund. So yeah, that's what this represents.
And I think this is an important source of funds for operating funds and it's appropriate use of capital funds. So I think it's one that we've benefited from for a number of years, and places those funds where we can really get the greatest benefit from them.
And Russ, to a point you've made before, really speaks to the importance of the capital project levy.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, without that, we wouldn't be doing this.
Yep, exactly.
And before we had a capital projects levy, whenever we needed to replace a roof, it came out of our operating. So that was, that's money that otherwise would be spent in the classroom.
Yep. Yeah.
So, any questions on the board resolution?
Well, I think it's one you have to have.
If not, I entertain a motion to approve board resolution 24-25-1.
Motion to approve board resolution 24-25-1.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And then finance report, and now it's your turn, Nick.
That's right. Yeah. So this is for, we're 1 month into the fiscal year, so this is going to be the first month's report. Just some quick overview, as Brian alluded to in his presentation, and as you saw on the different line graphs, September is a hard month because high startup costs, but we don't always collect as much revenue either. So it is a tight squeeze right now, but it's not a long-term concern because we know this is just how school funding works. And like we just talked about during the resolution, so the transfer from capital projects to the general fund, which again is not the loan, this is the actual money that it can be transferred, due yearly. It's higher than historically because we are, like I said, we're just identifying more pieces that can fit legally and are allowable. So this difference here is when this budget was adopted for this year, it was budgeted at 300,000, and Brian was able to identify $500,000. So that's already a positive move in the right direction for this current year budget, being $200,000 above what was budgeted. So positives there. Cash balances at the end of September, which is what Brian had just shared about. Again, cash balance, that general fund has more cash than the actual fund balance because it has that loan in it. But when you look at the accounting fund balance, it accounts for your liabilities, which we have a liability to our capital projects fund, which is why that cash balance is so low. And this again, this slide is one that I really wanted to, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, really paints a picture for why that fund balance is so important, right? We're feeling pretty good starting at 3%, obviously not at the 5% we wanted to start this year by board policy. But then within just 1 month, we're down to 0.5% because September is a hard month. There's gonna be months where it doesn't do that, but you want to be able to get through those rainy months, and we barely got by the rainy month this time. So luckily our cash is good because of the loan from the capital projects. But this really speaks to the importance of that fund balance. Did you have a question, Danielle? Okay. Oh. Do you now?
I was just recalling what, that we had taken the portion in advance to cover us by November of
This time November.
this time last year.
Mhm.
So I'm just sort of curious, you know, we're at a 0.5% fund balance. How are we looking for this November? Do you know what I'm saying? Like when you're looking at that curve of when money comes in versus when our big expenditures are,
Yeah.
is this year looking better?
Mhm.
Obviously, because we're not asking for a portion.
No, we're not anticipating a portion in advance. And I'm glad you bring it up because this time last year, we were also talking about a potential loan from the county, which we didn't have to do either. And October is a big tax collection month. So that's why we're not even, we're not thinking that an apportionment advance is going to be necessary to ensure that we have enough cash because again, our fund balance is down to 0.5%, but our cash is still better than that because of our loan from our capital projects.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, good question though. Other questions? So remember, this is that part where, I think, again, kudos to the board in adopting one of the, probably the most conservative budget I've seen since I've worked in this district. Because 1448 was very low compared to, we ended the year, I think 15, a little over 15. So 50 less than we finished was a smart move. So right now, our FTE over budget is 66 students, which again is going to, keep building that fund balance because we're operating pretty lean right now. And there's the note there that as we meet for a binding conditions meeting next week, we'll ask their advice on this from OSPI that the monthly apportionment will adjust itself in January because right now we're getting apportionment based on that 1448 number. It'll adjust itself in January to our actual enrollment unless we ask for an early adjustment. You know what? We'll see what OSPI thinks. Brian and I have discussed this, that we think it's still keep it lean as long as we can to just make sure we're not counting our eggs before they hatch at this point. So we're hoping to let OSPI do their normal adjustment when they do it, because trying to get it to adjust early would perhaps just be, yeah.
Well, yeah, we always experience some decline.
That's exactly right.
And I agree with you.
Yeah.
You have a sense of what that average percentage of decline is that we see?
That was on one of Brian's early slides showed the decline over a year, I believe, in enrollment.
That's looking at our internal numbers, which are different than what are funded by and different than what we're reporting on this year. What we're reporting on this year is the funded annual or the funded FTE. And if you look back at this called the 1251 report, it starts and ends at a very similar place. It dipped in the spring, but it starts around 1510 and it ends around 1510. More consistent than I was expecting.
That was just last year's. Okay.
So this is a side-by-side comparison of our actual versus budgeted FTE by grade. Unfortunately, kindergarten didn't come through as strong as we had hoped. But again, that's as we look at those national trends, I think kindergarten's always a wild card, quite frankly, because you know, as we hear about the national trends about birth rates and that kind of stuff, it's hard to really predict what kindergarten's gonna look like. But on the positive, we see the other end, we're, you know, our 11th and 12th grade is looking good compared to where we're budgeted, and our ALE programming is still going strong. So those are some positives in there. And so that, you know, that white line on the bottom is what we budgeted for. The orange line is where it was last year. And the blue line is where we are currently. So we're pretty much almost identical to where we were this time last year. So right now, we haven't realized that decrease that we've talked about and planned for. Yep.
So if you
So,
go back one slide,
sure.
so some of our strongest numbers are 11th and 12th.
Yeah.
So it speaks to the need to retain, you know, prevent dropout.
Seventh and eighth, and 11th and 12th.
Yeah,
So those are the some of the vulnerable years for that mid-year
yep.
decrease.
Yeah. And a strong sixth grade cohort too. It's our biggest class
That's a thing.
coming through.
Mm.
And those, again, you asked Danielle about what the teachers, talked to any of our sixth grade teachers, the phenomenal group of teachers who are doing a lot in some pretty tight spaces. So kudos to them. Yeah, so, you know, not only is it a celebration to see our enrollment similar to where it was last year, but again, celebrating the difference between our budget and that, you know, I think that's just it's a nice graph. So this is a table that this style of table we shared a little bit last year, just to kind of give you a perspective of what classes are looking like. You know, Danielle's question earlier about what does the unsustainability look like? You know, you look at Harmony with quite a few multi-age classrooms, which I know has caused some interesting opportunities, but also challenges with that. And again, even with that combination class at 5-6, you're still seeing class sizes around 30, 32. So this is the good celebration here is this is prior to, notice I wrote September, October up there because we're adding those 3 new teachers in November. So we're seeing those changes at Acme to first grade going from 1 section to 2, which is really going to support those learners. At Harmony, they're able to move one of the multi-level age classes to 2 straight ones. And then at Kendall, they felt their best need was actually to move into a multi-level, multi-age classroom.
So with these changes, adding those, will we be under the 17-to-1 ratio in K-3 at all the schools?
We will not be under it because you don't get a prize for being under it.
No, not under, I mean,
Yeah.
at me.
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah, we'll be really close without, I mean, full transparency, we're gonna leave a little bit of money on the table, but it wouldn't have been enough to pay for another teacher.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then here again is gonna be, I think that average students per section shows, those are where the pinch points are, right, a little bit, you know? Because those are average students per section, so we know there are gonna be students with classrooms with 39 in them. You know, there's also gonna be some smaller, more specialized classes with less than 31, but yeah, those are, yeah. Questions?
Could you go back one slide? We're
Sure.
still reading the high school.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
129, so we're 93 at 12th. Okay.
I'd be curious to know, like, if we're looking at 11th and 12th grade,
Mm-hmm.
has that been a stable FTE for those grades, or have we lost over the last few years into that cohort? Right, like I'd be curious about some of the retention data around that, right? Like maybe the 12th grade class has been 93 FTE all the way through.
Sure, right,
And we haven't, right? But that, I would love a little bit more
of like cohort-based trajectory.
cohort based, because that gives us a clearer sense of retention. And like when we were looking at the by grade sections, I found myself wondering, you know, I know we've done a lot of work with our ninth graders,
Mm-hmm.
right? To give them support, and with one of the
Ninth grade success.
The ninth grade success
Yeah.
program, it would be lovely to be able to have enough data to see if that's driving any kind of impact
Mhm.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I have a hunch it does,
Mhm.
but it'd be nice to be able to,
Have more than anecdotally that it does more.
yes,
Yeah.
to say,
Yep.
look, our numbers historically, we lost students as they went toward 12th grade, and since we started this, look, we're holding on to them at a better retention rate. And that can be a goal to keep improving those retention rates, because each student that stays with us after ninth grade, right? That's
Yeah.
that's good for the budget.
Yeah.
And it's good for those students.
And that's actually probably something that our next item after this is meeting scheduled, junior high school visit. It might be a pre-question to ask. Nick, if you can kind of
Sure.
note that for Matt,
Yep.
to tracking dropout rate over time and
Sure.
have some,
Mhm.
because I think that discussion fits very well with both academic achievement and what we're discussing here with budget and finance. I mean,
Yeah.
understanding that.
Mhm.
And to your point too, Danielle, it's kind of like a snowball effect too, right? Because the more students we're able to keep in our school, the more programs we can offer, which then will also keep more students in our
Right.
school.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so it's nice to see that a place where we've invested
Mm-hmm.
is paying out for those students' success, but
Yep.
also paying out financially.
Yeah.
There's a real, there's a nice alignment there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And every, a high school dropout, that's a failure of the system. And
Yes.
that's that impacts their life and the community as a whole.
Right. Right, and you look at our OSPI report card and graduation rate, and there's some room for
Improvement.
improvement.
There
And
is
so
indeed.
that's
Yeah.
a place that, we can strategically invest.
Any other questions for next presentation?
And I've got those notes for Matt ahead of time.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Very, very well presented.
Yeah.
Meeting schedule, so I wanted to, we needed to reschedule the junior high school visit. Matt was unable to make it on the date we'd scheduled, so a date that will work, and we're looking at Fridays, Jason. So a date that will work for both high school and junior high is November 15th. Want to see if, and Ed said that works for him.
Yep.
So I wanted to see if that works for the rest of you, the 15th of November.
I think I'm
Works for me.
gone.
What's that?
I'm gone. I'm in California that weekend.
You're gonna be in California.
I'm checking, but I know I teach in the mornings on Friday.
We can
I'm in the
do it any
classroom.
day during the week too, if I know a little ahead of time.
Yeah, if a different day other than Friday is fine for everybody, I can do that too.
If we do another day besides Friday and want to make it a longer day, we can also put the ERC in on that same day.
I think it's just Ed has, it would be up to him what days he can do, because I think his Monday through Thursdays are different.
Maybe we should do, if we're gonna look for a day other than the 15th is the doodle poll, including both Matt and Troy.
You got it.
And then
Yep.
we can zero in on some day that works for all of us. Or the most chance of attending.
Sure.
So, our next meeting is November 14th. November 14th, I want to, amongst the other things, we should have a bit of a discussion of planning for WASDA annual conference. And then after the 14th, of course, is the WASDA annual conference.
The 14th is our only meeting in November, is that
The only
right?
meeting, we have traditionally had, we bill annual conference as a board
Meeting.
meeting. And we've usually had some pullout during that too, and focus on one or more topics, and we can discuss that further at the 14th and kind of plan that in. I think it might, it's usually a good opportunity to catch up on some things like that.
Yeah, as far as a formal board meeting like this, the 14th will be the only one in November.
Yeah.
There's one in December as well.
So, other than that, nothing else on the agenda, so meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
The doodle poll.
Yep.
Nothing new on Friday, but probably
Okay.
open.
What time?